when people see an alternative, it's less violent, less harmful, and ultimately more satisfying, at least they'll be able to choose. Right now, there's so much dominance because of the industry of hate that you referred to. The second most concerning issue for people at 83%, just 3 percentage points back, of how divided we are.
Well,
so
it's recognized. People
really do recognize the danger in our division.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think with an example of people sitting down, humanizing each other, even though we're at different places philosophically, theologically, politically, however you put it. Just seeing that it actually can be done, and people could still maintain a relationship. It is my great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine, David Williamson, who I'm gonna read just a little bit here so I don't mess it up. But I want you to know who this guy is, and I'm so excited about this interview because we're going to have a lot of faith leaders because we're trying to understand the streams of philosophical and theological traditions that approach the public square, and so this is a unique one, and one that I don't know as much about, and so I'm just looking forward to the education. Anyhow. So David is the co-founder of the Central Florida Freethought Community. We're on a couple of things together. First of all, we're on the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. And secondly, we are on a commission for religious freedom. What's that called? The Central Florida Commission on Religious Freedom. And so it's fun working with this guy. He's bright. He's super friendly and often misunderstood. So, David, thank you for having this conversation.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to chat with you, Joel.
Well, this is going to be fun. I revealed a little bit about what we're doing here. As we approach fall, we're going to be putting out some material that will be helpful for congregational leaders, faith leaders, thought leaders to help their people approach the elections, approach the public square issues and policy formation out of their own faith tradition, so that they can bring to fore kind of how they come to a moral decision, which is really important. And so my first question is, as you come to the public square and what you have to contribute and what those in your community have to, the Freethought community. Not first, a lot of people understand the Freethought community, so it would be helpful for you to say a little bit about that community. And then kind of what is the heritage out of which you come, the traditional, the philosophical tradition from which you come.
Yeah. No, I thanks for that opportunity to talk about, kind of who we are and what we do. I moved to the area when I met my wife online in 2012, and one of the first things that I asked her once we got to know each other was, where's the local atheist community? And she's like, I don't need that. I have my own, my own bubble, my own friends, my own politics, my own groups of people. And I'm like, that's great, but we need community for one another, and sometimes beyond those small bubbles. And so she was, interested in separation of church and state, as was I. There are many things in the last 13 years since we founded the organization that have caused us and called us to action around keeping religion and government separate. And we can dive into that as we have before in conversation. But that's where we started, was with the value of kind of secularism, keeping religion out of government in ways that it doesn't belong. Right? You and I have good conversations about sometimes how it does belong. But then we decided, if we're going to have folks that are going to fight the good fight with us, then we've got to break bread together. We've got to get to know one another. And so we realized pretty quickly that we needed a sort of congregation, for lack of a better, more secular word, to bring people together. And so we do about 30 events a month now in climbing. We're across about 9 counties in the Central Florida area with small groups mostly, but we do have a monthly educational event and volunteering events twice a month, and a lot of socializing because we are human like everybody else. But so, yeah, the Freethought community is going strong, and we're really happy to be part of the interfaith work that you're, leading us on and participating in. And yeah, I mean, we're people too, and we need friends, and we need more than family inside of our bubble.
Yeah. Well, tell us about, it's so funny because when I'm interviewing different faith leaders of different denominations, different religions, you can kind of get an idea of, okay, they've got either a well-developed, like Catholic social policy. I mean, it's just like brilliant. It's so sophisticated and so well thought out. Yeah, prescribed, exactly. Or other, Islam has, doesn't philosophically separate church,
right?
But or faith and state, mosque and state,
right?
But of course, in different countries, it's expressed in different ways, but you realize kind of where they're coming from because you can study their theology. Tell us about non-theology or atheology, or
yeah. So personally, I've never really believed in a God. I'd never had cause to. My parents checked the box Christian on a survey, and we might go to a Easter or a Christmas service, but mostly with family. So they did a bad job of making me a Christian, and it shows. Mm-hmm. And so I never really thought much about religion, but it was probably 20 years ago when I realized that I had a people, right? I had a community that didn't exist, wasn't strong, but did basically have a demographic, there, and started to build communities when I was in Sarasota. But where it starts is honestly before religion. We didn't, before we were in tribes, we didn't necessarily have the theologies that we do today. We had different types of beliefs, and those have evolved over the years. But there's always been skeptics. There's always been people who didn't believe that for whatever reason, for good or for bad reasons. And the many traditions that exist share so many things. And I like to say that humanism, the place that I come from, when somebody says, well, what's your religion? You don't get to be an atheist. You have to pick one. Then I say, I'm a humanist. And, that comes from all of the positive things that religion shares other than theology. I like to think of it that way. And the executive director of the American Humanist Association, who spoke at our event last month, Fish Stark, he said that humanism is science telling us what's true and empathy telling us what's right. And every humanist that you ask, every atheist that you ask will give you a different answer for kind of what they believe as opposed to what they disbelieve. But I like that because it's simple. It's got two principles, and we share those things with nearly everybody. Unless somebody is anti-science or doesn't understand science, they're going to agree with both of those things. And it just lacks a theology, but it's still a good way to live.
Yeah. Let me drill down on that a little bit, because this is fascinating to me, because practically all approach to community, especially to social policy, especially to politics, involves some sort of moral reasoning. Mm-hmm. I remember one of the presidential debates of the past. My first question to Hillary Clinton was, describe to me how you reach a moral decision. Walk me through that process. Help me with how you reach a moral decision in your approach. I realize, first of all, faith leaders can't even speak for their faith. It's like everybody has a different approach. Everybody has different ideas. We're individuals and so on and so forth. I would think that with the free thought community, just the indication of that title, it would be even more
cat herding.
Yeah, exactly. More tenuous to talk about this is how humanists reach a moral decision.
Right.
But tell us about how that process works.
Sure. And it's less a process than it is a reaction to circumstances. I think most people make those judgments quickly and sometimes badly, and hopefully more often than not, they learn from them and do better next time. And I don't think that non-believers make moral decisions any differently than believers. But what I think we do differently is we do not justify them by something that is prescribed to us by people or scripture. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about why we make moral decisions or how we make moral decisions, I think we should think about not being obedient to someone else's instruction, but doing right by our fellow people or our planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I make a decision, I make that snap decision about anything in life, and I hope it's a good decision, and I learn when it's not because of the reaction that it causes, the people that it affects. And that's no different than people of faith, in my opinion. But when we look back on it and we say, why do we feel this way? Or how did we come to that decision? You might say, and I don't want to speak for you, but you might say, well, Scripture says this. And that's a justification for a decision you made, I think, more than it is a reason for making the decision that you did in that moment. So I think we're making the same judgments, and we're learning from those mistakes. And the older we get, hopefully the wiser we get about that. But, we have developed thousands of years reciprocity, the consequences of our actions, caring for others shows us how to build community and societies more successfully. And this goes to today when we have leaders that are making decisions based on their own theology or their own personal preferences as opposed to benefit the citizenry or the constituents that they serve. So I think we make better decisions when we think about the consequences that it has on other people than what God's opinion might be about something.
You bring up a really good point here, and again, one that deserves follow-up, I think. What are, I infer from what you're saying, is that one of your basic moral components is its impact on others. When you're considering what's right, what are some of those components in addition to its impact on others?
Yeah, well, I think you have to consider the impact on those present and immediately, affected, but also the long-term consequences, right? And we're talking about personal decisions. Now, do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I do this today or tomorrow? Those are less consequential than leaders making decisions about how they act and converse with one another, about how they legislate. And here I have forgot the question.
Just what are the moral components that you consider should be taken into consideration when you're trying to make, in other words, what's the end result
right
from a decision that you want to see that will be beneficial rather than harmful?
Yeah, and this is a lot less described in non-theistic circles because there's not a book or a practice or a known policy or something that has been told to us. We have to decide these things on our own. And like we were referring to earlier, the cat herding that has to happen in every community, getting people to, act or behave in a certain way because it's right, not because it's the way we were told to do it, involves, considering the consequences of the here and now as well as the later, and how it affects the planet as well, which is a hot topic right now, right? Whether we're talking about everything from dominionist theology to climate change and how we should nurture our shared planet. But literally what matters is the effects on other people and ourselves, right? And hopefully in that order sometimes, but it's hard to not put yourself first. Then you put your family next. This is an evolutionary trait. Caring for our offspring, caring for our neighbor comes next. And then eventually, through the connectedness that we have today, realizing what's going on the other side of the world because of decisions that we make collectively here.
Yeah. Again, this, let me follow up on this because you talked about caring for our neighbor, and literally where we have a lot of interchange is trying to figure out how we can benefit Central Florida. And I've loved you being a part. It was a really, my reaction when I heard that an atheist wanted to join the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, my first reaction was, wait a minute, it's interfaith. They don't have faith. But the second reaction I had, the better angel, was, this would be great because they're part of the community. And a significant part of the community. And so faith will be better exercised because we have that voice among us that considers people of non-faith.
Yeah.
And so what do you think, let's just say the Interfaith Council, but a mixture of faith and non-faith leaders, what can we contribute to Central Florida? What's kind of our special, maybe unique lane or contribution that we can make to the well-being of our community?
Yeah, when I think about this, I think about the other leaders in the community, faith leaders, and what they do and how they kind of minister to their congregations. And one of the things, the programs that I think, excuse me, that it's an important part is cultivating virtues that benefit society, not just ourselves, right? Because we can do selfishness without any help.
Right.
But what we need to do is we need to cultivate values like empathy, honesty, in making sure that those are talked about and literally making an intentional effort to show those with whom we disagree that we don't disagree that much.
Yeah.
But let's talk about why we do. And not forget why the things that we do agree on. So I think we've really got to work as community leaders and participants in the community and parents, particularly grandparents, right, and friends, to cultivate those values that will make us a better place to live. Whether you call it a democracy or a constitutional republic, those types of things have to happen for us to be successful. And the best leaders will lead based on shared values, not personal preference.
Yeah. When you talk about, this is something I've appreciated about you, David, is that you compromise on language and approach. You don't compromise on what you believe as far as this is not going to turn out well in the long run, especially when it comes to church and state issues and so on and so forth. And we've talked about the balance, the establishment versus free exercise balance of the First Amendment. And those will always be in tension just because of how we're made up. And so it's an ongoing conversation. But idealistically, how do you maintain a fervent belief and passion for what you believe, whether it be humanist or theological, what you believe, and still maintain a genuine, not just respectful approach, but maybe an interested or teach me something approach about people who just, you really, under normal circumstances, wouldn't even be having a conversation.
Right. No, agreeing to disagree has never been harder, I think. And I think that the polarization that this great connectedness of the internet has caused is contributing to that. But I do think, and we all do this badly, and I think it's good to kind of go back to our values and think about how we should act, and we don't do that enough. And I was in a room of 100 people one time, and the speaker said, "Who here has a personal mission statement?" One person raised their hand. And I think those kind of things, if we would take advantage of those types of ideas, I think we'd be better off. But particularly as leaders of secular, religious, faith communities, of any community, we really have to intentionally humanize the people with whom we disagree. Right? We can't assume that we disagree on much more than perhaps this one thing right now. And one of the things that I enjoy the most about my interaction with my fellow clergy members is that we have almost everything in common except for those theological beliefs, right? And maybe what we do on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And someone who is a member of the clergy in the humanist tradition, I don't bring a full-time experience to this job. I'm a safety professional for my day job, but I do enjoy the opportunity to talk about how we can do better and how, as leaders, we can demonstrate better behaviors. Right? We were talking before we recorded today about how, from sheriffs to presidents, we find examples of people behaving in ways that make it okay for everyone else not to.
Yeah.
And while the places that I go and see my friends in local leadership, we don't have that. But what we've got to do as individuals and as leaders is bring more people who don't argue well into conversation. Yeah. I really think that's got to be a goal. It's not a goal that I can take care of in my organization, but I think the Central Florida Pledge has a place to play there, and I think the Interfaith Council does as well.
When we do that, what skills do we need to teach folks? Because most people have not been taught how to disagree.
Right.
They've not even been taught how to listen well, let alone diffuse escalating rhetoric, and or even less how to mediate between opposing ideas.
Yeah.
In order to enable not just a compromise of where do we go from here, but actually saving a relationship, even though there's a disagreement. So what skills do you think ought to be either organized or offered to people so that we can better disagree?
Yeah, so I don't have the market cornered on this question. If I did, I'd probably already have a book on it. But I do think we all have good ideas, and a couple that I have is, one is, let's talk in person, right? Let's not expect that we're going to resolve this over Zoom or in a Facebook, chat thread, or even worse, a comment thread on a public post where everybody's watching us argue badly. And so I think we need to do this in person, and I think we need to have people showing us how to do it, which is why I absolutely love, the idea that an atheist and a Christian can sit down and talk is just amazing to people every day, but it happens every day. But I think we've got to teach people how to stop and think about another person's perception of reality before we respond, assuming we know their world. I was talking to somebody just yesterday morning. Every year on the National Day of Prayer / Reason, we sit down for breakfast, myself and a conservative Christian pastor, and the conversation came up about the mental health perceptions that we have of people who commit violence. And I thought about it for a minute and said, I think some people have violent lives that don't require them to be of questionable mental health to commit violent acts. That is in no way a justification for them, but it explains why some people rise to violence more quickly and don't require anything beyond a slight trigger that they've seen in their entire life.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, and I think violence is being more and more instilled in our language, in the rhetoric. The second part of our pledge is, I will refrain from inflammatory words and actions. The inflammatory words are just becoming a part. They're becoming so normalized now.
You know why?
And so
because they sell. They click.
Yeah.
They make influencers money.
There is an industry.
They get you to turn on the news. They get you to sell commercials and buy commercials. I mean, there's no surprise here to the folks that are tuned into this. But what happens is we forget that when we become the victims of that clickbait. And I'll tell you, hyperbole sells.
Yeah.
But it also kills.
Yeah.
And that's a joke, right? Hyperbole doesn't necessarily kill, but hyperbole kills is what I like to say, because it is in itself hyperbole and a joke about hyperbole.
Yeah.
But the idea is when we sensationalize, when we dramatize, when we blow things out of proportion, we get attention. And I think there's an evolutionary reason for this.
Yeah.
I think we are attracted to hockey fights, car crashes, and MMA, whether we're also disgusted or not. We're attracted to those things because seeing those things, those violent things, gives us information about how we can survive. Right? That's my personal hypothesis on why drama is interesting to us. And there's a study out there, but I do feel like that lends itself to our attraction. When I see birds mobbing behaviors around threats, it reminds me of these human behaviors around violent actions. And it also reminds me of why we use hyperbole and sensationalism to get clicks. It works. We're a victim of our own success in figuring out how to market.
Yeah.
We really are.
So what's the antidote?
It's hard to turn that device off. It's hard not to rise to that level of rhetoric when it comes your way. And I don't know that we're going to solve it by not engaging, but I think we have to, as leaders, engage in smarter ways and find leaders who don't engage in smarter ways and go sit down with them, right? If there's a mayor or a sheriff or somebody that is acting in a way that's inappropriate, a private meeting, particularly with a member of clergy that they respect, can have a lot to do with how they act, I think, right?
Well, and I also think what we're doing right now is
not to give them a talking to, by the way, but I'm talking back to the last answer I was given, and I'm sorry to draw it back into that, but sitting down with those officials in a private way, not so that you can lecture them on the the way they should act, but to remind them of the harm that might be done.
Right.
So that's what I mean, more than I do mean, a finger waving.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm having all these, when you talk to an old guy about anything, all these stories come to mind, personal stories of personal interactions. And
yes.
let's not go
back
there.
In my day.
Yeah, let's not go there. But another part of that, giving people an alternative to being triggered is giving people an example.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now is, and again, I think more and more, when people see an alternative that is less violent, less harmful, and ultimately more satisfying, at least they'll be able to choose. Right now, there's so much dominance because of the industry of hate that you referred to, or the industry of violence,
sensationalism.
Yeah. And there's a huge industry out there. But again, there are more and more people that the Dignity Index people just did a national survey about what really concerns people. And the top one, of course, this is a national survey. What's your biggest issue? What really concerns you most? The top issue with 86% was the cost of living increase. Second,
it's the economy, stupid, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that what we heard?
Yeah. The second most concerning issue for people at 83%, just 3 percentage points back, of how divided we are.
Well,
so
it's recognized. People
really do recognize the danger in our division.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think with an example of people sitting down, humanizing each other, even though we're at different places philosophically, theologically, politically, however you put it, just seeing that it actually can be done, and people could still maintain a relationship, even though they disagree on some things, they agree on other things. I just think it's a wholesome thing to keep generating that kind of content.
Absolutely, and we hopefully people are drawn to it for the right reasons, right? I mean, there's not going to be any fights here today that are going to get people to be attracted to it, but hopefully the idea that two people so opposed theologically can agree on so many other things is an attractant. I think the idea of I forgot what it was. You were mentioning something of so we as humans have a really hard time with very small things and very large things, right? Time, money, right? Distance, shape of the earth too, apparently. But the idea that we can perceive the benefit of something really, saving money, it just came to me as I was speaking. Saving money is hard because we don't see the short-term benefit of those things. We don't imagine the scale of, how the returns over time can benefit us if we can save a few bucks a month, starting when we're 20 years old.
Yeah.
So I think we don't, in the same way, see the social benefits of playing nicely, right? Unless it's immediate.
Yeah.
And so I think we are really bad at that, and politicians, between fundraising and getting clicks and votes, are victims of the same circumstances that we all are, and we have to start seeing the long-term consequences. And I think, like you were saying a minute ago, the older we get, the more stories we have to tell and talk about. So I think we have the benefit of years as we get older of understanding the consequences of those things that we experienced in the past and how we handled them, good or badly.
Yeah. Well, and you also increasingly realize the value of the time that you have left, the time that you're living, the wonderful things in life. They become so much more apparent to you the older you get. Just the value of all of the people and all the opportunities. You were talking about the immediate versus the long-term consequences, and there's a meme out now, and I can't remember all of the ingredients, but the title of it is "Choose Your Heart," and the first one is, I remember this, divorce is hard, long-term marriage is hard, choose your heart. And it goes down this list of Do you think one of these is going to be easier and have a higher payoff and all of that kind of stuff? But you got to choose. It's the old. When I was growing up, there was a commercial with this guy holding an oil filter from a ruined car, and he said, "I'm a mechanic. You can pay me now or pay me later."
Right.
And so
it's hard. There is a whole lot of check engine lights on vehicles out there right now, and I think it's because we're worried about things that seem more urgent, but maybe not as important. Yeah. And I think we're really bad at deciding those things until we get older and realize that we're not invincible. And realize the error of all the mistakes that we made in the past, and which is why old people get a good hard time for giving advice to younger people, because we want them to succeed.
I know,
right? And I appreciate the advice that I'm given, but sometimes it's the wrong time, the wrong place. So I'm trying to do better.
Well, last question.
Yeah.
What do you think we uniquely, as again philosophical or theological leaders, have to contribute to Central Florida that may not come from the other sectors?
I think that people look to religious leaders, less to me, in humanistic and freethought and atheist organizations. We're not seen necessarily as moral leaders, and that's okay, right? I'm okay with that. I don't need that burden. You can have it.
Yeah.
But I think what we have to do is we have to be aware of the challenges that exist outside and within our community, and we've got to really tackle, I think, social isolation. This is something that we saw among adults and particularly children during COVID, but we also see it because of the connectedness that we have while we're just sitting on our couch or in our gaming chair, not interacting with other people. So I think we have to interact with our communities more so that we see the good that's happening and signal boost it, and the bad and address it appropriately. But we've also got to be seen with other communities and even working with other communities. I'll say it's really hard for non-theistic communities to work with religious communities and all secular people that don't, that are considered nuns by some surveys, like none of the above, non-religious. It's a growing number, the fastest growing number in the United States as a religious demographic. They're not all atheists. Some of them consider themselves Christians, but they're not affiliated with a religion by their answer to the survey. Yeah. And so we've got to look at everybody that's participating in the circles that we dwell in and see what we can do better, what we can signal boost that's going well, but also look for those challenges. And then I guess my point, coming back to my point, apologies, was working with and among people of faith and not is really hard in volunteer settings. And I'll tell you why. And I hope that this helps people understand why maybe their events aren't well attended by non-religious people, whether they're a secular or a religious charity, or they're a church or a synagogue or a mosque. When we volunteer as non-religious people, we want to come in, have a pep talk, do the good work, make some new friends, and go home. And what we find is religious people want to come in and thank God before they get started for everything up until that day and including that day, do the work, sometimes because God said so, but hopefully because it's the right thing to do, and then have a prayer before they go home again. And while I think those things are appropriate for insular communities, I think when we find secular charities and other organizations trying to work together, it's a little harder for us to enter those spaces. And even when they are doing it right, we expect there to be a prayer. So off track, off topic, apologies for that. But we have to work together more. And if we do work together more as leaders and people within our communities, I think we'll do better. But we are always singing to or preaching to the choir. We are talking to the people that want to hear what we say. But I hope messages like this, that of the Central Florida Pledge, and the other things that are so important to this community, get out there, because it's necessary for us to set an example. And the organizations that Mr. Ginsburg and the foundation are working on are tremendous, and I'm so glad to see the legacy he's built.
Well, thank you for coming in. This is it lived up to my expectations. I've learned, and I always learn when you're talking, David. You're again insightful, and so I appreciate our friendship, but even more our collegiality and trying to do good for our community.
Right, and behind off camera as well. We get along pretty good, Joel, and I appreciate you.